What's up, y'all? In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to make risers and tension effects. I'm going to be going through the basics of like the core fundamental stuff you need to know to make them, and then I'll do some general tips as far as like what I think are best practices and how to get the most out of making the samples, and how to have the most useful ones. Some stuff that I think is kind of unorthodox the way I approach it, and then lastly we'll go over I think 5 different examples of like what I would say are advanced risers. So this is the most advanced version we're going to go to, just to give you an idea if you want to stick around. Okay, so from there I want to jump into the very basics of making risers. I used Serum for all the examples that I have here, and this first row, it's all the same patch with just a different thing modulated. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what are the different things that I modulate to get a riser to sound like a riser. These are not going to sound good, but I think that they illustrate really well what the different effects are. So the first thing is obviously pitch. I'm not going to show you how to do this other than this very first time, but what you want to do here is take your pitch. I use macros for this and I'll explain why later, but it's important to use macros, I would say. Go in here, select your source macro 1, and then I go to the master tuning and I've clicked 19 as the unit, global master tuning as the destination, and then unipolar or bipolar doesn't matter on this, but then I also go ahead and do it a second time, and what that does is allow you to have 4 octaves of change, so that the final octave is 4 octaves above the original octave. And the reason for that is there's not even numbers. If you go up to like 30 whatever, 36 or whatever, 38, it's not an even 4 octaves. It doesn't have to always be like pitch related to your track, but I find that that's just helpful in case I want it. The first thing that I recommend modulating is the pitch. This is what it sounds like. So we just have a saw sweeping up 4 octaves. From there, I'll say the rest of these, I also modulated the pitch, but that's just to kind of give you a baseline of what we're doing. So it probably doesn't sound too great at this point. And I didn't use post effects for these, but you'll get the gist from this. So the next thing that I recommend doing modulation on is intensity or mix. So using your mix knobs as a mod, destination. So on this one, the second patch, I'm modulating the pitch tuning, right? The tuning still. And then I also modulate the detuning. I turn the unison up to 16 voices. And I also have a phaser that I'm just rising the mix on. And I also have the compression that I put on there. So as you can hear, it goes from being clear, concise, almost one voice down here to a bunch of different spread out voices, and then you can see it start swirling once the phaser comes in. You should be able to hear it too if you have like headphones on. See, so that's another way to like give it width towards the like crescendo of the rise. So the next thing that I recommend modulating is your rates of things. So I have 2 different little examples in this one piece right here. I'll go ahead and play it first. So as you can hear, I have this one's a triangle oscillator, so it's not the saw on this one. And I'm modulating, again, the pitch, but also the phaser rate. So if you can see in here, as we get to the peaks, we're increasing the mix of the phaser and the rate, so it kind of makes it swirl faster. The second thing that you can do is also have like an LFO that you put onto your levels or onto anything, and then just raise the rate of that LFO. So again, this is affecting the rate here. So we kind of have 2 different layers going on, and that works well together. I'm going to keep moving quick just because I have so many examples here. The next thing I would recommend is filter modulation. So I'll just play this one, and you should probably kind of get the gist of what I'm talking about by now. So we have the same example, and as you can see, we're fading in the filter along with all the other stuff that we're doing. I could even make a sharper filter to give it more of a pronounced sound. So that's the next thing I would recommend doing, filters, and it doesn't just need to be low passes going up. You could also do band passes going up, band passes going down, high cuts that come in at the end and like sweep the bottom off of it to give space for drums or whatever. So that's another thing I would recommend. So that's the 4 things that I would recommend modulating. So I have pitch, intensity, rate, and filter, right? So those are the 4 things. And you can do it in your post effects, you can do it in your synth, you can do wherever you want to do those things. And then lastly, let's talk about why did I say do macros instead of using your like internal filters, right? Why not do an envelope and then a couple LFOs? And I would say the best reason for that is if you have the macro that you can change really quickly, like let's say you have your thing, there's snare, 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 and then the snares speed up and then they stop right here. I should have made an example for that, but I think you get the idea. So like eighths and then sixteenths and then silence, you can like really quickly get a custom riser out of it, right? So save that as a patch and use it as a patch instead of a sample, even though I do recommend samples over like trying to do these live. And then also once you have your automation stuff here, you can really quickly like make different risers out of the same patch. So here we have like a virtual riot charge up sounding laser thing, right? And that's the same patch as this one. Okay, so moving into my next section here, I want to talk about different sound sources that you can use. So I just showed how to use like synth oscillators and noise from there. But you don't need to feel limited to that. You can make risers using like audio in a DAW without having to like open up a synth every time you want to do it. If you have cool sounds, I just use noise for this one. But you don't have to like, don't limit yourself to just using synths for this. I think that's like a big mistake that I made early on doing risers and stuff like that. So the first example that I have here is like just using a noise layer, right? Noise is great always for risers. So what I'm doing on this one, I'll play it first and then explain it. Is really simply I'm increasing the channel pitch. I have it on resample mode so you can see that it changes in length there. And then I just have a couple different band sweeps going on and an OTT kind of cleaning them up. One of the bands here is raising the frequency, right? So this band is increasing the frequency and I kind of just tuned those in, like wrote them to taste. Didn't do them randomly. I had to kind of fine tune those. And then the second one is adjusting the band width. So this right here. And that kind of gives you like a really clean, tight, easy riser that you can like use that's versatile. It's not going to take a bunch of headroom in your track up. So noise, definitely recommend. The next thing that I would say is really useful for risers is using stuff that's not, that you wouldn't expect to be a riser. So here, I had this effects sample that I made out of just like a weird sound design session that I wasn't really aiming for musical sounding stuff. And then I did just a bunch of little chops on it, right? I used the same piece for all these and then just increased the tempo here, used the sliders to kind of fade that in, used stretch mode so that it doesn't change the length, right? Even though that doesn't sound too bad either. I just kind of prefer to use stretch mode to get clear, concise little bits here. And then I used a convolution reverb that raises in wetness. Right, and I have a nice little tail that decays off at the end, which can be useful in a lot of situations. And then lastly, I have another little example here where I use, again, just another little piece of like effects Foley stuff that I had in my samples folder. So on this one, the only thing that I did to it was just raise the pitch and you get like a cool little rewind, you know, press play type rewind tape stop effect just from doing a pitch sweep on this. No effects, nothing at all on that. So if you're making a track and you're like, now I need a down, you know, a down sweep or an up sweep, you can always take something that's in your track already, like an effects layer or a sound layer or instrument or vocal or whatever it might be, do a pitch sweep up on it or down on it, or just use a random sample from your library and get a really quick, easy riser doing that. That's, again, no effects on that. It's not even routed to a mixer track. So then the other sound source that I would say is super important, and this one I think gives you the most cohesive sounding track, would be use elements from your song, right? So I'm gonna play it first and then I'll go over what different things I used. So I kind of used a bunch of different pieces that I made off of this. So I have my little Tokyo Drift bell. Then like a hardstyle kick version of the bell. So what I use as the layers here is I have this first piece that is just reversed reverb hit off of one of the bells here. I think I may have used, yeah, the first one for that. So I'm sweeping with the same tone as the first bell into the first bell. It kind of makes it sound more cohesive. Then I just added again a noise layer under that. I got that one from a clap sample and then reversed both of those. So then for the second piece here, we have again the same trick. I'm sliding like a low layer that I made out of this first piece here, right? Another reverb hit on that first piece that I recorded and rendered and reversed. Then I took the high end out of it so that I had space for my bells. Right? Now I have those two things taking up different sections of the spectrum, and then a little riser sweep again that's not quite as bright as the first one there. It's kind of, you know, it could be, I could fiddle with that and get like a better sound. It might be better brighter, but I'm not sure. And then lastly, a little like impact here on the last, right? It runs into the same dance clap from the first part. These are all three the same clap actually. So just the effects soloed out sound like this. Right? And then when we lay it with our track pieces, it should all work together. Kind of sweep into each other. It kind of sounds clunky to my ear now, but as you can hear here, if I remove this clap bell, or I'm sorry, if I remove this clap like explosion thing that I have, it loses a little bit of pop. So that's kind of something you can mess with and see what you personally like in your track. So then next I want to talk about 3 different effects that I find super easy to use and just useful for risers in particular. The first of which is frequency shifting. So I'm going to run through this one super quickly. So we have this bass sound right here. That's what I'm going to be modulating. And as you can see, it's got kind of like a tone to it. It's almost like an alarm clock noise that I've looped or something like that. And if you do a rise on it, right, like a pitch rise, you get like the standard, you know, I think everybody's familiar with that sound. Whereas if you use a frequency shifter, you get kind of a different tone to it. I'm not going to explain. It's mathematically, look it up if you want to know why it sounds different. But I will say this is like, to every time I hear it, first of all, I think it works really well, but also it takes me back to the Behemoth riser, I think is done with frequency shifting. So every time I hear this, I'm like, Behemoth. That's one that's just, you know, pretty self-explanatory. I shouldn't have to say much more about that. It's just useful. Use it with whatever, you know, if you ever feel like you want to do a pitch rise, you can always frequency shift it too, and it gives it a different tone. So then the next effect that I find particularly useful is, I've already mentioned, it's ring modulation. So I'll go ahead and play this. This is the bass sound source without the ring modulation. Right, so just kind of like a little modulated oscillator tone thing. And if I send it through the effects chain that I have on it, you'll notice that it gets all bouncy, right? I've kind of already covered this, but I'll go through it real quickly again. I'm using ring modulation. I have the distance not set to the super long one. That makes it go way faster. If we use the middle thing there, we have a little bit slower of a rate. And then I'm just raising the frequency. Now, once you put it at half, so as you can see, 50% here is going to change the tone quite a bit. And it actually gets rid of some of the amp modulation and replaces it with stereo modulation, because again, I've turned my left-right phase up. So it's going from ear to ear. Then you can combine this with other stuff too, like a pitch rise to get quick, interesting, easy stuff. And again, all these tricks, I would say I did most of them one at a time, but combine like as many as you want to do. Not all of them though. Don't do everything at once. Just do like 3 or 4 different tricks and you'll get a good riser out of it. So this last effect is one that I've heard in a ton of tracks, but it's not as common anymore, but it is, again, pretty useful because it's basically a low pass filter. This is the sound that I'm inputting into it. It sounds kind of bad, but you know, doesn't really matter that much. It's a riser, so if it's filling negative space, that's probably a good thing. And so I've just taken a bit crusher here and I'm raising the rate, right? This sample rate right here. And then I'm also doing a band sweep on this. So I'm sweeping a band upwards and I'll just kind of play these together. And it gives you that type of sound. If you change the rate to higher, you'll get the full sound in. Let me turn my band sweep off too. So as you can see, it's kind of fading up these like distorted frequencies from the top end of it. Right, and as we go lower, the other thing you can do too is like go up high and then pull it back. Right, so you kind of have the push up and pull back to give finality to your riser. And then again, sending a filter into it just helps clean up this messy sound. And that doesn't work too well with the down sweep at the end, but you get the gist there. So bit crushing, another good one that can work if you want a low pass, but you want to have like crunchy 8-bit sounding stuff too. So that's all the basic techniques that I would recommend. You can definitely explore and find some more stuff. There's way more different things you can definitely do to get risers, but from there I want to move into like some best practices and general tips I would give for making risers and rendering them to samples and stuff. First thing is, don't do fade ins from 0 at your start of the riser. So like if your volume starts at 0, you can get these risers, especially if they're really long, where I'm having to like preview a bunch of the riser to get an idea of what the end is. And then I have to go in and like verify that the end sounds like that. And the reason I recommend not to do that is because you can get tighter compression on the entire riser, right? Like a more consistent, louder sound. If you just take one that's fully loud, like this one that starts loud, and always you can add in the volume fade later. It's super easily now, especially with the new update. So it's easy to add in. It helps your riser be more consistent volume wise all across. And it just gives you a more like clear idea of what you're picking out of your sample library pretty quickly. So I would recommend don't give yourself volume sweeps, just add them in later. The next thing that I would recommend is don't do songwriting and riser creation at the same time. Like if you're working on a song and you get to the part where you're like, okay, I want to add a riser to this, don't stop writing the song and go get a serum out or, you know, a synth out or different layers of stuff and make a riser out of it. Like just use a sample for the time being, because otherwise you might like kill your flow and spend a bunch of time working on a riser that nobody cares about anyways. It's kind of just like a songwriting assisting thing. It's something that helped the listener, but like I've heard maybe one riser ever or two that I thought like, wow, that's a really good riser. So don't stop your flow by like stopping in the middle of your track to make a riser. The next one I already talked about a little bit, but it's definitely use macros and don't use the internal LFO and envelope tools for your writing process. No matter what you're trying to automate, it's just generally easier, in my opinion, to like, if you need a 4-bar thing, right here, I would have to go in here, switch it to 4 bars, move it like this, do this, do this, do this. You know, I'm doing all this different stuff that like, especially if you're using a synth like Massive X, which gets great risers, but the automations in there suck really badly. Don't use this because you can just really quickly add 8 different things to one of these or use the 4 different slots to do different things. I feel like it helps you get more different sounds out of one riser patch, and it helps you get more easily customizable stuff with your track, like I showed with the top example where you're like, this could even be like a mid breakdown, you know, where you have your section just ended and you're going to kind of do a 4-bar riser to the next one. And then if you're like, oh, in my next section, it's, you know, snares that are increasing. I want to start from here. I can even start from the middle, you know. and then I want to do a fake out at the end, I could like double fake it. I'm spending too much time on this part, but just to emphasize the point. Right? If you had like a little drum hit here or whatever, and you can look at your song in the playlist and do whatever works visually as well as like, I mean, you want to do what sounds right to your ears no matter what it visually looks like. But this I just feel like is more useful than being in a synth and then in a playlist and then in a synth and then in the playlist. The next quick one would be don't use every single tip that I show on one riser. Like the next two tips bleed together. So I will say you want with risers, as far as I've found, to go for quantity over quality. I'd rather have 15 different risers to put on a track and see how they sound than one really good riser, because it's like it's not going to make a big difference in how your track sounds, especially if that really good riser that you spent like 2 days working on, which I don't know why in hell you would do that, but if you did, what if you never even put it in a track? Or what if you're constantly trying to use it in tracks where it doesn't fit because you spent 2 days on it, right? There's bad from both sides that can come from that. Then the last thing that I'll say tip wise is get super experimental and like do crazy stuff with risers. Don't go in and like say, I mean, I would say maybe copy a couple splice samples for your first few risers. But like if you have a riser that you really love, don't make another version of it. Just like do weird stuff and create a new riser, because you can always get tons of risers off Splice. I think noise risers are useful and good, but like I don't want to make like 86 more noise risers. I can go get more off Splice super easily. Just do random stuff. You don't have to be super like you don't have to be too thoughtful on what exactly you're trying to do with the riser. You can just do random stuff, and I have an example of that later that I'll show. So from there, we're going to move into the more advanced risers. So the first one that I have here, I called Sample Spinner. I don't remember what this one sounds like, but we'll check it out. Okay, so as you can see, I've mixed a bunch of different tricks here together, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly as well too. So the first thing that I have here, no post effects. Let's see if we have any post effects. Yeah, we do. There's quite a bit of stuff on this one. So real quickly, the basic premise of this is using a sampler where, again, I'm using that same effects sound slurry sample from earlier where it's just a random effects generation session and looping a single part of it. And as you can hear, it like gets up into the almost becoming like a single cycle oscillator type deal. And I do that by raising the pitch while using the loop function in Phase Plant. You can also do this same thing in Serum if you use the pitch knob and don't have this thing clicked, because this is going to make it ends when it gets to the end of the sample. You want it to keep going. You just can't. You have to use the entire section of the sample if you're using Serum to do that. In Phase Plant, you have the ability to do these crossfades, which like make it a little less snappier. So from there, I've done just a bunch of the different things that I already mentioned. So we have a band EQ that's boosting the highs, just bringing in more frequencies that I want to be prominent, and then a low pass filter and a high cut filter that are basically letting in the highs and the lows at the same time. So as you can see there, it's just kind of letting in the spectrum as it goes. Then I have a dynamics, which brings the volume up on the whole thing. Pretty self-explanatory. Then we have a bit crusher that I just showed the trick for. So that goes up, and the automation on this one is different from the other one. So instead of doing a late layer on this, I'm doing a late modulation with the bit crusher and the distortion. So it starts out kind of crispy on the top. And I'm actually fading in not the bit crusher. The bit crusher is not attached. Just the distortion fades in late there. So it kind of gets it crispy at the end. I'll just play that part. So that's without the distortion. Now if I turn this distortion back on, it gets crunchier. And then lastly, we have a reverb and a OTT to bring it together tone-wise and spectrum-wise. And then a reverb just to add width to it, which it's already pretty wide without this. So as you can see, it's got width. The reverb almost just makes it be in a space, gives it a place to be. Also washes it out some when I make it more pronounced. So that's the first example that's a little more complex, and hopefully that was a good enough explanation that you can copy it. So moving on from there, we have another one that's sample based. The only difference here is I used a sample in this one that has a clear and defined tail. Again, I'm doing a volume sweep on some noise. I have like a noise late layer in this one that comes in later. I'm not going to even go over the effects on this. I just want to show that like by using a sample that has a tail, again, I'm using the loop feature here. It lets the riser have a little bit more of a clear rhythm. The last thing that I do want to mention with this one before I move on is on this one, instead of fading the reverb up, I'm fading it down. So just pay attention to this here and listen for how it starts in a space and then goes into a drier feeling. So you don't always need to be increasing things in rate and intensity. You can also just go down and it does pretty much the same effect. And then again, just an OTT on that to glue it together. And I would call that done. Like all these risers, except for the first row, which didn't, the first couple of these didn't sound super good. I wouldn't spend more than like 15 to 20 minutes on one of these. Even less if you can. If you can do one in 3 minutes, do it in 3. Then we have another pitch modulation one here. And this one kind of introduces a concept that I'll go further on later. But that's the idea of increasing the amount of a modulation. So here we have not just rate modulation where this changes the speed of this modulator, which helps it go from slow wobbles to fast wobbles, but also if you notice in the beginning, there's not that much movement from, like that's not that much space. It's probably going one semitone. And the reason for that is I'm modulating here my Y position on this LFO. So I'm increasing the amount of modulation, and you can do that using the Y position, or you can always go in here and set an auxiliary source from your thing that you want it to modulate it. So in this case, like my one single tuning thing. And again, this one has pitch modulation on it. A lot of them have had that so far. I think that's probably the most versatile to me thing that I use over and over again. But I would say too, you don't always need pitch modulation, especially if you're doing multiple layers. Just have one pitch modulated and then the rest can work with that layer. So hopefully that gives you the gist there. I'm already going pretty long on this recording, so I don't want to go too awful much longer. Then before we go into the most complex example, let me talk about my last tip. This is a massive tip right here, y'all. This is the most massive tip I've ever probably given, I think. And the reason that it's just the most ridiculous, massive tip that I've ever come up with. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that a little bit. Probably milked it a little too hard, but this is that you can do, and it is a pretty good tip. It's not just that it's in massive. This is one that I picked up off of Mr. Bill podcast. I don't think he's shown this on his channel ever, but basically what I did here was I went into my parameters, and I picked the oscillator pitch on one of my oscillators, did an automation off that. So right now it sounds like this. And I also linked all 3 of the other oscillators to do the same modulation. So if one of these changes, if this changes, it's affecting all of them. So now the reason that I did this in massive is massive and a bunch of other synths. I don't know if Serum does it. It might, and I just don't know about it. Is it has a randomizer function. So now I can go in here, hit randomize a couple times, right? I've turned all my parameter things on. This decides how much it wants to randomize. That's nothing. This is like just the parameters, mod depth, and type selection. And then now I get a really quick, easy random riser. And I could render like 50 of these out and then use them as layers. I can go in here and change this for every one of them. And then get just different shapes for all of these. Let me click these all again. And just make a bunch of different risers doing this. And then also I would recommend probably turning the filters off if you're going to do this, or else sometimes they'll block out the sound. I would also probably drop a compressor onto the end of the chain here, so you can just get a new random one out of each of these. So again, just another quick easy tip: any synth that has randomization, you can randomize it and then just do pitch modulation on every time a little bit different or the same, doesn't matter. So now we're moving on to the most complicated riser that I made for this, and that just combines a bunch of different elements in an intentional way on this one. I actually did spend a little bit more time, like maybe 30 minutes on this one. So this is what the final result sounds like, again, to remind you. And so what I've done here, I'll solo out my different layers. I have the pitch bumping layer here, right? That one. I have a tonal rise layer that's like a reversed reverb. And then I also have like two little final pieces that close out the end of this riser. One is a noise sweep that fades in, and the other is a cymbal. So I'll go through each of these pieces one at a time. The first one is the pitch bump. And as you can see on this, I did a rate modulation that was separate from my pitch modulation here, and I kind of fine-tuned those to get like what I thought was a cool, clearer sound out of it. So I've taken my rate here, and that modulates the rate of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. So my LFO 1 here is doing a pitch modulation that affects the master tuning of this, so I could do multiple oscillators if I wanted to. And then the second one is doing a gate on the volume, so this thing right here, right? Which just helps clean it up versus this. That's kind of like oscillating into itself, which is cool. But this just gives it a little more space to work with. Next, I have a pitch modulator that's modulating just the pitch of the oscillator. And I did that with the master tuning again. So mixing those two different things together, I also sent this into a LFO. I'm sorry, not an LFO. I also sent this into an EQ, cut some of the low mids out, which tends to be a, problematic area in mixes anyways, just so it's not too powerful, and then send it through a distortion, which, since I have amp modulation turned on, gives it an extra little bump once it hits up against the clipping mechanism or whatever of this distortion, so the log function of this distortion. So the next thing that I have here too is a filter cut that I fade in on the distortion, right? So if I turn this all the way on, but then I've just faded the mix down a little bit. So just kind of doing some different things to get a different texture out of it. Next layer here is a tonal rise layer where I ran like a distorted synth sound through a big huge reverb and then just sweep it up into this. And then I think I also tuned both of these together. So this is in F sharp, yeah, and then this is also in F sharp. But instead of just modulating the amplitude on this with the filter fade, or with the fade right here, I'm also increasing the pitch 12 semitones, which is an octave. This one probably goes up, let me see if it's 2 octaves or 4 octaves here. It sounds like it's 2, to be honest. Yeah, and it goes up 2 octaves, or no, it's macro 1 would control that. No, it's macro 2, and it goes up 2 octaves as well. So this ends up 2 octaves on an F sharp. This one also ends on an F sharp, which gives it a little more cohesiveness. Then lastly, these layers, I just pick things out because I already have a bit of a tonal layer. I already have a bit of a messy, wide, kind of weird layer. I don't really have any noise to fill the empty space. So again, here I'm kind of doing the whole mixing thing, but just on a single riser level where I'm doing a bunch of stereo width effects. So I have on this a flanger that increases in rate. If I play it from the beginning, gotta get a better idea here. And it just kind of makes it wobble towards the end. And then I'm sending that into a high EQ and a limiter that really slams the volume down here just so that it has like a tighter finish to it, right? I don't want these to be too loud. And again, I'm doing a mixing chain on all 3 of these sounds here. So they all go into an OTT and a compressor and another EQ. And then I have 2 little final pieces that I added to this. So I'll play it all together towards the end again. And so I did 2 things to like add a little bit more clarity to this riser, and that is I put an EQ band. These are just some unorthodox things that I felt like were worth mentioning that you can use, that sweeps up the low frequencies, right? So cuts those lows out, and then also I have a high boost that boosts the highs right at the end, because I felt like without that, if you look at this, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, if you look at this here, this felt a lot more present than the high end, and when you're doing a riser, finishing with highs tends to have the most energy. So just a high boost here that, as you can see, it's like sweeping in and adding just a little bit more energy and crispness to that high end. So with all that being said, if you made it to this point in the video, you are an absolute gangster for watching however long this video is just about risers. You got the dedication, homie. So I'm going to put every riser that I did for right here, I'll put them in a folder and just drop them somewhere in the little description section below so you can get these for free. Thank you for watching. Thank you for adding watch time to this video. I can't imagine there's too many people watching it at this point right now, because this is just a terrible topic, or a really dry topic, and a pretty long video to boot. So thank you for watching. I will see y'all in the next one.